Imagine a disappearance that logic cannot explain. It is as if, today, an entire carrier strike group of a superpower simply vanished without a trace. No distress signals, no survivors, just a dead, oppressive silence. 3 elite legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, simply ceased to exist. These numbers became so cursed that Rome never dared to assign them to new regiments again. In this story, we will tell you about the greatest betrayal of the ancient world, when a killer drank wine from the same cup as his victim, smiling in his face moments before the strike. You will learn what Roman soldiers saw when, 6 years later, they risked returning to this cursed forest. Not just a battlefield, but a monstrous open-air temple where trees were decorated with ghastly trophies and altars bore the traces of unthinkable rituals. Why did the most powerful man on the planet bang his head against the doors of his palace at night in hysteria? What package with horrifying contents was shipped halfway across Europe to intimidate entire nations? And how did one fatal mistake in a remote thicket forever draw an invisible border on the map of the modern world? This is not just a story about a defeat. It is a chronicle of a catastrophe that an empire tried to erase from memory for 2,000 years. Watch until the end to see with your own eyes the moment when the invincible Roman machine broke down, and to learn the price that had to be paid for carelessness. Imagine silence. Not the reverent silence found in a temple, nor the kind that precedes the dawn. This is a different silence. Heavy, sticky. It smells of damp earth, rotting foliage, and iron that began to rust before it even cooled. The forest around does not sing. Birds do not sing here. They flew away, frightened by screams that died down just a few hours ago. Only the crows remain. Thousands of crows circling over the treetops like black smoke. You are standing in the middle of the Teutoburg Forest. Beneath your feet is not just mud. It is a mess of waterlogged clay and what remains of the best army of the ancient world. Welcome to the crime scene that the Roman Empire tried to forget for 2,000 years. Look around. Look carefully under your feet. Do you see that glint in the mud? That is not gold. It is a silver mask. The faceplate of a Roman cavalry helmet. The calm face of an ancient hero, frozen in eternal serenity. Exquisite work. Art. But there is no head behind this mask. The man who wore it has vanished. Dissolved. Like his entire cohort. Like his entire legion. Like the very idea that civilization can defeat wild nature. Here, in a place archaeologists today call Kalkriese, lies not just an army. Here lies pride. Here lies arrogance. Here lies the myth of invincibility. Were you told that Roman legions were an indestructible machine? A wall of shields that grinds down barbarians like grain? Forget it. Look at these finds. Coins with the profile of Emperor Augustus scattered in panic. Surgical instruments that doctors never had time to use to save the wounded. Shackles. Yes, shackles. The Romans carried them in the baggage train by the crate load. They were so confident they were going not to war, but to collect slaves, that they prepared chains for thousands of captives in advance. But irony is the cruelest of all goddesses. The Romans themselves were shackled in these chains. 3 legions, the 17th, the 18th, the 19th. Think about that number. It is not just 3 regiments of soldiers. It is almost 20,000 people. The elite, heavy infantry, auxiliary cavalry, archers, engineers, and with them, thousands of civilians. Women, children, servants, merchants. An entire walking city. a tenth of the entire military power of the Roman Empire. Destroyed, erased, crossed off the lists of the living in 3 days. They did not just lose a battle. They disappeared, as if the earth opened up and swallowed them. There were defeats in the history of Rome. There were disasters. But someone always survived. Someone always returned to tell how it happened. But here? Here the forest snapped shut like a trap. No messengers, no runners. Only an oppressive silence that crept from Germany to the borders of Italy, driving the border garrisons insane. Roman patrols stared into the thicket on the other bank of the Rhine, waiting to see familiar eagles, the gleam of armor, standards. But no one came out of the forest. What do you feel when you realize that your protection, your confidence in tomorrow, your invincible army is just an illusion? Imagine the shock of a citizen of Rome. For them, it was equivalent to an entire carrier strike group of a superpower suddenly disappearing today. Without an SOS signal, without wreckage, just dissolving into the fog. Archaeological excavations in Calcles paint a picture not of a heroic battle, but of a slaughter. A chaotic, dirty massacre. Bones are not found in battle formation. They lie mixed with the bones of mules. Soldiers did not stand shoulder to shoulder. They ran. They hid under wagons. They were slaughtered like cattle in a pen. This was not a fight of equals. It was a hunt. A hunt where the predator, accustomed to being at the top of the food chain, suddenly became the prey. Roman order, straight lines, discipline, hierarchy, collided with the primeval chaos of the German forest. And chaos won. The forest does not recognize straight lines. The swamp does not respect rank. Rain washes away the boundaries between a general and a private. In this mud soaked with terror, the Roman order, turned into nothing. The 17th, 18th, and 19th legions, these numbers would become forever cursed. They would never again be assigned to any unit. A superstitious fear of what happened in these forests would live in the Roman army for centuries. The empire would try to pretend that these legions never existed. They would be struck from the registers, just as one erases the name of a relative who has disgraced the family. But the bones remained lying here, bleached by rains, dragged away by wild beasts, grown into the roots of trees. How could this happen? How did the best military machine in human history, which conquered the Mediterranean, Gaul, and Egypt, fail so badly? It was not an accident. It was not just an unfortunate set of circumstances. Every catastrophe has a first and last name. Every failure has an architect. Among the coins found in the mud of Calcrisa, one special mark is often found. A stamp with 3 letters, V-A-R. This is the name of the man who led them here. Publius Quintilius Varus, governor, aristocrat, friend of the emperor. A man whose blindness was so all-encompassing that it became legendary. Varus looked at this forest and saw a peaceful province ready to pay taxes. He looked at the German chieftains feasting at his table and saw submissive vassals. He looked at the man sitting at his right hand and saw a devoted son of Rome. He saw what he wanted to see, but the one sitting next to him saw something completely different. While the legionaries cleaned their armor and the centurions checked the rosters, a plan was already maturing in one man's head. A plan that would turn the world upside down. A plan monstrous in its deceit and brilliant in its simplicity. Varus thought he was controlling the situation. In reality, he was a puppet, the strings of which were held by the one he trusted most in the world. And to understand how the trap slammed shut, we need to look into the commander's tent, where the fate of Europe was being decided to the clinking of wine goblets. The tent smells of expensive Falernian wine, roasted meat, and incense, which vainly try to overpower the smell of dampness seeping in from the outside. Here, behind a canvas of thick fabric, Rome created a small island of illusory safety. Outside is the cold wind and alien gods. Inside is silver tableware, soft carpets, and talk of high politics. At the main table sits a man who considers himself the master of this world. Publius Quintilius Varus. He is over 50 years old. He is not a soldier to the bone. He is an administrator, a bureaucrat of the highest caliber, a relative of Emperor Augustus himself by marriage, a man accustomed to the marble of the Roman Forum and the silk of Syrian palaces. Historians would later write a cruel phrase about him. He came to rich Syria poor, and left poor Syria rich. Varus sincerely believes that Germany is already conquered. For him, these forests are not a battlefield, but just another province that needs to be taxed, censused, and taught Roman law. He looks at the map and sees not a threat, but a career. Opposite him sits the one Varus calls a friend, Arminius. He is 25. He is young, handsome, charismatic. He wears a Roman toga, and a gold knight's ring gleams on his finger, a sign of belonging to the Roman nobility. He speaks Latin better than many legionaries from the Italian hinterlands. He quotes Roman poets. He knows how to hold a goblet, how to joke at a dinner party, and how to command Roman auxiliary cavalry. Varus looks at Arminius and sees the success of Roman civilization. Look, he thinks, we took a savage, the son of a Cherusci chieftain, raised him in Rome, gave him citizenship, and now he is one of us. Varus sees him as an adopted son, proof that any barbarian can become a civilized man if properly trained. But Varus is mistaken. He is looking at a perfect weapon, created by the empire itself, and does not realize that the muzzle of this weapon is pointed at his chest. Arminius is not just a traitor. He is a product of the Roman system. The Romans themselves taught him everything. They taught him discipline. They showed him how legions are built, how they march, how they set up camp. He knows the manual by heart. But more importantly, he knows what the Romans fear. He knows that a legion is a terrifying force in an open field, but a clumsy beast in the forest. He knows that a Roman officer is arrogant and predictable. Arminius is a hacker who compromised the code of the world's most powerful military machine from the inside. While they drink wine, Arminius smiles. His smile is flawless. But behind that smile lies the cold calculation of a predator. He is playing a double game on a scale undreamed of, even by the most sophisticated Roman senators. By day, he commands Roman detachments, and by night, he sends messengers to the tribes, assembling an unthinkable alliance. The Marsi, Bructeri, Cherusci, tribes that have been slaughtering each other for centuries, suddenly unite. They are united not by love for each other, but by hatred for taxes, for Roman courts, for the arrogance of these aliens in sandals who forbid them to live by the laws of their ancestors. And Arminius becomes the glue that holds this fragile alliance together. The most striking thing about this story is that Varus was warned, and more than once. The atmosphere in the camp is like Game of Thrones. Arminius's father-in-law, the old chieftain Segestes, hates his son-in-law. At one of the feasts, right before the departure, Segestes throws the terrible truth in Varus's face. "He is betraying you," he screams, pointing a finger at Arminius. Chain me, but chain him too. Torture us both, and you will learn the truth before it is too late. Imagine the scene. Silence in the tent. Everyone freezes. The fate of 3 legions, the fate of tens of thousands of people hangs by a thread. One word from Varus and Arminius is seized. The history of Europe could have gone down a different path. But Varus laughs. For him, this is just a ridiculous quarrel between 2 savages. He thinks Segestes is slandering his son-in-law out of personal animosity. After all, Arminius stole Segestes' daughter, Thusnelda. Varus, with his Roman snobbery, cannot believe that this educated, polite young man, a Roman knight, would prefer dirty hides and forest life to the splendor of Rome. It does not fit in his head. The psychology of the colonizer plays a cruel joke on him. He considers the Roman way of life the only possible good. Who in their right mind would refuse warm baths and wine for swamps? Varus waves his hand. "Leave it," he says. "No need to spoil the evening." And with this gesture, he signs the death warrant for himself and his army. Varus's blindness is not just stupidity. It is professional deformation. He sees the world through the prism of reports and paragraphs, not through the prism of reality. Arminius acts brilliantly. He does not suggest Varus go into the deep forest for no reason. No, he creates a pretext. He reports an uprising in a remote area. A small revolt, he says. The tribes are asking for the help of Roman justice. He hits Varus's weakest spot, his vanity. Varus sees himself not as a conqueror, but as a judge bringing the law. The idea that barbarians are asking him to come and judge them flatters him. "We just need to deviate slightly from the route," Arminius whispers insinuatingly, leaning over the map. "We'll cut through the forest, put down the rebellion, show the power of Roman arms, and return to winter quarters as heroes." It is a lie from the first word to the last. But Varus nods. He gives the order to change the route. Do you understand what is happening at this moment? Experienced centurions who have been through dozens of campaigns are surely frowning. They look at the sky, which is clouding over with leaden clouds. They look at the forest, standing like a wall. They do not like this idea. Taking heavy infantry off a reliable military road onto narrow forest paths in late September is tactical suicide. But an order is an order. Discipline is the foundation of the legion, and discipline forces them to remain silent. Arminius asks for permission to ride ahead, ostensibly to gather auxiliary troops and prepare supplies for the Romans. Varus lets him go. He releases his killer, patting him on the shoulder. "Go, my friend," he lightly says. "We will meet on the way." When Arminius rides out of the Roman camp on his horse, he must barely be able to contain his trembling. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. The mask is off. No more pretending. No more smiling at people he is about to kill. He gallops into the forest, where thousands of warriors are already waiting for him. They haven't eaten for several days. They have prayed to the gods of war. They have sharpened their framey, long spears. And in the Roman camp, the trumpets begin to sound the assembly. Soldiers roll up tents, load property onto mules. The huge, clumsy snake of the Roman army begins to wake up. They do not yet know that this is their last march. They think they are going to restore order. In fact, they are walking straight into a slaughter. Varus steps out of his tent and looks at the horizon. The first drops of rain fall on his face. He pays it no mind. Autumn in Germany is always rainy. He mounts his horse, surrounded by lictors, scribes, and servants. He feels like the representative of the divine Augustus. He is calm. But the forest has already begun to breathe. The trees have already begun to close in. And somewhere out there, In the depths of the thicket, thousands of eyes are already watching every movement of the golden Roman eagle swaying above the heads of the legionaries. The road back is cut off, although the Romans do not know it yet. Ahead is only a narrow path leading nowhere. The column starts moving. Wagon wheels creak, hooves clatter. The coarse laughter of soldiers and the crying of children in the baggage train are heard. The 17th, 18th, and 19th legions take the first step into the green hell from which they are not destined to return. The trap has snapped shut, but the victim will only realize it when the teeth of the trap have already closed on the bone. Imagine a snake, a huge, clumsy, scaly snake made of metal, wood, and flesh, crawling along the ground, unaware that its head has already been severed. This snake is the Roman column, and it stretches for 15 or maybe 20 kilometers. You stand on a hill and look down, a sight that takes your breath away, but one that would make any reasonable general turn gray with horror. This is not a battle formation. This is not an army ready for battle. This is a relocation. This is a nomadic city. Varus, in his infinite overconfidence, has turned a military campaign into a cumbersome administrative procession. Look closely at this crowd. Yes, there are legionaries, hardened veterans in laminar lorica segmentata armor. But look who is walking next to them. Women in wagons rocking children, servants carrying bundles of clothes, merchants hoping to sell trinkets to soldiers at a halt, cooks, scribes, veterinarians. Thousands of wagons loaded with grain, wine, weapons, and the governor's furniture. Wheels get stuck in the soil, mules are stubborn, drivers shout. Varus broke the first rule of war. Mobility is life. He chained his soldiers to this giant, fat baggage train, which, like an anchor, pulls them to the bottom. They turn off the reliable paved military road. Arminius promised a shortcut, and they believe him. They enter the forest. At first, it seems like just an inconvenience. The trees are sparse, the path is wide. But with every kilometer, with every hour spent on the road, the scenery changes. The forest, this ancient Teutoburg Forest, begins to show its character. It becomes denser. The trees close over their heads, blocking out the sky, creating eternal twilight even at noon. Roots, huge and knobbly, bulge from the ground like the bony fingers of the dead, trying to grab the soldiers by the ankles. And then the rain begins. This is not a light drizzle. This is the cold autumn downpour of northern Europe, which seems like it will never end. By the end of September in the year 9 AD, the weather decided to play for the Germans. The heavens opened. Water pours like a wall, washing away the boundaries of reality. And the ground beneath the feet of tens of thousands of people and animals instantly turns into a swamp. Try to imagine this physical experience. You are a legionary. You are wearing 30 or even 40 kilograms of gear. Helmet, breastplate, sword, dagger, 2 pilum javelins, entrenching tool, rations for 3 days, and you are walking ankle-deep and sometimes knee-deep in greasy, sticky clay. Your caligae, the famous Roman sandals studded with hobnails, are perfect for the rocky roads of the Mediterranean. But here they turn into skis. Mud gets packed between the nails. Feet slip. Every step is a struggle. Every step drains strength that will very soon be needed for survival. The formation breaks. In such conditions, it is impossible to keep distance. Cohorts mix with the baggage train. A wagon breaks an axle, blocking the narrow path. Traffic jam. Screams. Centurions tear their throats, trying to restore order. But their commands are drowned in the noise of the wind, and the crackling of breaking branches. Soldiers have to turn into lumberjacks. The path is too narrow for the wide Roman wagons. They have to chop down trees, uproot stumps, build causeways across streams that have swollen from the rain. It is hellish labor. They sweat under the icy rain, their muscles burn, and morale drops by the minute. Where are we going? This question can be read in everyone's eyes. Why did we leave the good road? Where is this damned rebellion we are supposed to put down? Varus rides in the center of the column, trying to save face. But even he begins to get nervous. His palanquin shakes. The horses stumble. Reports reach him. The wagons have fallen behind. The men are tired. We are stretched out too thin. But it is too late to turn back. The narrow forest gut does not allow such a behemoth to turn around. Only forward.
Deeper into the trap.
The psychology of the crowd begins to change. Bravado leaves. Imperial arrogance leaves. In their place comes dull irritation and, worst of all, anxiety. The forest presses in. It seems alive. Branches whip faces like slaps. Strange sounds come from the thicket. The hoot of an owl, the snap of a branch, a distant howl. Are these animals? Or are these signals? The Romans feel eyes on them. You know that feeling when you walk down a dark street and feel with your back that you are being watched? Multiply that by 20,000. The forest is looking at them with thousands of eyes. But they see no one. Only a green wall, gray rain, and fog rising from the ground, turning the figures of comrades into ghosts. Shields. The Roman scutum is a marvel of engineering. Large, curved plywood covered in leather and reinforced with metal. But under torrential rain, the leather gets soaked. The wood swells. The shield becomes heavy as a tombstone. It pulls the arm down. Javelins also get wet. Straps become slippery. Weapons designed to kill become a burden. By midday, contact between the head of the column and the tail is practically lost. The vanguard has gone ahead, hacking a road with axes. The rear guard has hopelessly fallen behind, pulling stuck wagons out of mud pits. The army is torn to pieces. It is vulnerable as never before. If someone wanted to attack now, it would be the perfect moment. But there is no attack. Not yet. There is only an exhausting march into nowhere. Arminius and his scouts have vanished. They rode ahead to check the road, the commanders say. But they are gone for an hour, 2, 3. The Romans are left alone in a stranger's house, where the owner has turned off the lights and locked the door. At this moment, when fatigue reaches its peak and vigilance is dulled by the monotonous squelching of mud, nature finally closes around them. To the left is the steep, wooded Kalkrisa hill. To the right is the impassable Great Bog. A narrow passage, only a couple of 100 meters wide, the perfect bottleneck. Here the air stands thick, saturated with the smell of rot. Even the wind dies down, as if holding its breath before a jump. The birds fall completely silent. Listen. Do you hear that whistle? A thin, sharp sound slicing through the noise of the rain. It is not the wind in the branches. It is a sound a Roman soldier knows out of 1,000. The first javelin flies out of the green wall, piercing the wet air. It does not hit a shield. It strikes the neck of an unsuspecting soldier who just slipped in the mud. The man falls without a sound, choking on blood. His comrade turns around, not understanding what happened, and at that moment, the forest explodes. Hell opens its gates. The invisible death they feared in their nightmares has ceased to be a ghost and taken on flesh. In an instant, the world detonates. Thousands of javelins, like angry wasps, fly out of the green twilight. They do not fall from the sky in an arc, as in an open field. They strike at point-blank range, from 10, from 5 meters, from above, from the treetops, and from below, from the dense undergrowth. A whistle, the dull thud of iron against shield wood, the wet crunch of tearing flesh, and a scream. One continuous, many-voiced scream that drowns out the noise of the downpour. This is not a battle. This is an execution. The Roman military machine, that perfect mechanism of destruction created for open spaces, suddenly finds itself helpless. Imagine a heavyweight boxer, a world champion, locked in a phone booth with a pack of rabid dogs. His strength does not matter. His technique is useless. He simply has nowhere to swing. The legionaries try to do what they were taught by years of drill: close ranks. "To arms! In formation!" centurions shout, tearing their voices. But what formation? To the left is a steep slope. To the right is a bottomless swamp. In the middle is a narrow path clogged with terrified mules, screaming women, and breaking wagons. Soldiers push each other, fall into the mud, step on the wounded. The famous Roman testudo, a wall of shields protecting against arrows, is impossible here. Trees break the formation, roots knock feet out from under them, and the enemy is not visible. That is the most terrifying part. The Germans do not come out for a fair wall-against-wall fight. They are ghosts. They strike and disappear, stab with a spear from behind an oak and dissolve into the foliage, throw a javelin and retreat into the fog. They know every path, every ravine. For the Romans, this forest is an alien, hostile planet. For the Germans, it is their home, where the walls help the hosts kill the guests. Archaeologists excavating the battlefield at Calclisa found proof of how carefully this trap was planned. There, on the hillside, they discovered the remains of a turf rampart. The Germans were not just waiting in the bushes. They built fortifications in advance. They prepared firing points. They sat there for weeks, sharpening weapons, and waiting for Varus to lead his army to the slaughter. The Romans were not just walking through the forest. They were walking along a fortress wall, from which they were shot with impunity, like targets in a shooting range. And then something happens that finally breaks the back of Roman morale. Remember the auxiliary troops? Those very detachments of Germans who marched in the vanguard and rear guard, tasked with protecting the flanks? The Romans considered them their own. They ate from the same pots, knew the same passwords. In the chaos of battle, a legionary sees a familiar silhouette, a familiar helmet. He thinks, "Thank the gods, reinforcements." He turns his back to them to repel the attack from the forest together and receives a sword thrust under the shoulder blade. Those who were supposed to cover their backs begin to slaughter them. This is a betrayal on a scale difficult to comprehend. Imagine that in the heat of a firefight, your partner, with whom you served for 5 years, suddenly turns his barrel and shoots you. Shock paralyzes faster than a wound. In the eyes of dying Romans, one reads not pain, but bewilderment. What for? We were brothers in arms. But for the Germans, they were never brothers. They were occupiers. And now the masks are off. Panic seizes the column like a forest fire. Discipline, that cement of the Roman army, crumbles to dust. Officers lose control. Orders contradict each other. Someone shouts, "Hold!" Someone, "Forward!" Someone, "Retreat!" But there is nowhere to retreat. Behind are traffic jams. Ahead is an ambush. The rain intensifies, turning the battlefield into a surreal picture of hell. Blood mixes with mud, creating a slippery slurry on which it is impossible to stand. Romans, encased in heavy iron, become hostages of their protection. If a legionary falls into this mud, he will not get up. The weight of the wet shield and armor presses him to the ground. He is trampled by his own men. People drown in the mud without even being wounded. They choke on the slurry, while a massacre goes on above their heads. Look at this. Do you see that centurion? He is missing an eye, his helmet is dented, but he is still trying to gather a handful of fighters around him. He waves his vitis, a vine staff, the symbol of authority, and bellows commands in Latin. He tries to create an island of order in an ocean of chaos. "To me! Shields up!" But a javelin pierces his throat, and his voice cuts off. The island is overwhelmed by a wave of barbarians. They swoop in, slash, and bounce back, leaving only corpses behind. This is no longer an army. It is a crowd of terrified people trapped in a meat grinder. The whistle of javelins, the wails of wounded mules, the crack of breaking spears, and the guttural cries of the victors merge into one monstrous symphony. The Germans strike selectively, like snipers. They take out the officers. They kill the signalers. Without the sounds of trumpets, without the commands of centurions, the legion goes blind and deaf. The huge organism disintegrates into thousands of lonely cells, each of which is doomed. Varus is likely still alive. He is in the center, where the guard is thicker, but he is already a dead man. He sees the work of his entire life collapsing. He sees his brilliant career, his ambitions, his name drowning in a German swamp. He realizes that Arminius did not just deceive him. Arminius destroyed him. That very son with whom he drank wine last night is now somewhere out there in the forest, commanding this execution. By the end of the day, the ground is so soaked with blood that it has turned red. The attack does not stop for a minute. The Germans rotate, rest, eat, and return to kill. The Romans, however, have not slept, eaten, or taken off their armor for many hours. Their strength is running out. There is no hope for a breakthrough. There is only animal fear and the understanding that the night will be even more terrifying. When twilight begins to descend on the forest, the horror changes shape. Now the enemy is not just invisible. Now every tree, every bush in the dark seems like a monster. The screams of captives being tortured in the forest reach those left alive, shredding their nerves. Psychological pressure becomes unbearable. Many soldiers, crazed with fear, drop their weapons and simply sit on the ground, covering their heads with their hands, waiting for the end. The giant has begun its agony. The Roman army, wounded, bleeding, surrounded, still twitches in convulsions. But the outcome is already foregone. The predators tighten the ring, and ahead awaits the final act of the tragedy, the destruction of those who still dare to breathe. By the third day, it ceased to be a battle. It became agony. Imagine a wounded beast cornered. It wheezes, it snaps, but there is no longer rage in its eyes, only anguish. The Roman army, or what was left of it, crawled forward no longer by order, but by inertia. The instinct for survival drove them north, to where, beyond the forests, a ghostly hope of salvation shimmered. The rain did not stop. The sky seemed to have decided to wash away this shame along with the people. The ground underfoot turned into a liquid mess in which mud, blood, and the debris of imperial grandeur mixed. You will no longer see shining armor here. The iron is covered with rust and a brown crust. Red cloaks have turned into gray rags. The faces of men who just 3 days ago were masters of the world now resembled masks from a Greek tragedy, distorted by horror, exhausted, white as chalk. They tried to break through, one last time, gathered their remaining strength, formed into a semblance of a wedge. But Arminius, that genius director of their death, had foreseen everything. Their path was blocked by an earthen rampart, not just a mound, but a fortification built with Roman thoroughness, but against Romans. From above, from a safe height, the Germans looked down on them like spectators in the Colosseum looking at doomed gladiators. Only here, there was no emperor who could raise a thumb and grant life. Here, there was only a sentence. The Romans rushed to assault. It was a gesture of despair. Heavy infantry clambered up the slippery clay of the rampart, slid down, fell under a hail of stones and spears. They were knocked down like bowling pins. Those who fell did not get up. They were trampled by their own. The formation finally crumbled. The legion ceased to exist as an organism. It disintegrated into thousands of lonely, hunted people, each dying in their own personal hell. And in the center of this nightmare, surrounded by a thinning guard, stood Publius Quintilius Varus. Look at him now. This is no longer the arrogant aristocrat who drank wine in the tent. He is wounded. His hand is bandaged with a dirty rag. His eyes shine feverishly. He realizes this is the end. Not just the end of the campaign. It is the end of his line, his honor, his name. He knows what awaits him in captivity. Arminius will not just kill him. He will make a scarecrow out of him. He will be led in chains through German villages. Slaves will spit on him. He will be tortured to enjoy the humiliation of Rome. For a Roman patrician, there are things worse than death. Disgrace. That is what they feared most. Varus remembers his father. He was also a general, and he also ended up in a lost battle at Philippi.
What did his father do?
He did not wait for the mercy of the victors. He chose the Roman way, cold steel instead of hot shame. Varus looks at his sword, a gladius, a short, wide blade designed to stab enemies. Today it will serve another purpose. The Empire does not forgive losers, but it respects the dead, he perhaps thinks. Dying soldiers scream around him. The very people whom he, as a father commander, was supposed to lead to the light. He betrayed them with his stupidity, and now he betrays them for the last time, leaving them alone in the face of death. This is the moment of truth. Does Varus rest the hilt of the sword on the ground, or ask his freedman to hold the blade? History differs on the details, but the result is the same: a sharp thrust. Steel enters under the ribs, piercing the heart. The body of the governor, heavy and useless, falls into the mud. Quintilius Varus, the man who was supposed to bring law to Germany, passed his final sentence on himself. But his death brought no relief. It became the signal for total collapse. Imagine what happens to a soldier when he learns the general is dead. The commander has killed himself. This news flies through the ranks faster than an arrow. If the emperor's governor himself, a man invested with supreme power, decided there is no hope, then what can a simple legionary hope for? The last threads of discipline snap with a crack. Higher officers, legates, tribunes, follow Varus's example. An epidemic of suicides begins. The elite of the army, the flower of Roman knighthood, massively slit their veins and throw themselves on swords. They choose a noble death, leaving 20,000 of their soldiers to be torn apart. It is a terrible contrast. Generals die quickly and cleanly, preserving the illusion of dignity. Privates die long, dirty, and terrible deaths. The army turns into a herd. Some drop their weapons and fall to their knees, begging for mercy. Fools. They reach out to the barbarians, hoping for captivity, for slavery, for any kind of life. But the Germans do not need slaves. They need revenge. They need blood for their gods. Prisoners are killed on the spot. Those who try to run are caught with lassos and finished off with clubs. German cavalry bursts into the crowd. This is no longer a battle. It is a harvest. Swords rise and fall, rise and fall. The monotonous work of executioners. Screams die down, replaced by wheezes. The earth can no longer absorb the blood. It stands in puddles, mixing with rainwater. By the evening of the third day, it was all over. The silence that descended on the Teutoburg Forest was more terrifying than the noise of battle. It was the silence of a graveyard. The victors walked among mountains of corpses, finishing off the wounded and collecting trophies. They stripped armor from the dead, took weapons, cut off purses. But the main trophy lay where Varus fell. The Germans found the governor's body. They did not let him decay in peace. Half burned, some loyal servant tried to commit the body to fire but did not have time to finish the rite. It was dragged from the pyre. Arminius surely approached the corpse of the man he once called a friend. What did he feel? Triumph? Contempt? Or the cold satisfaction of a perfectly played chess game? He gave an order. Varus's head was separated from his body, roughly, with a cleaver. It was no longer a person, no longer a governor, no longer a friend of the emperor. It was an object, a symbol of victory. A bloody piece of flesh with a frozen grimace of horror on its face. It was held up by the hair, shown to the cheering crowd of warriors. A howl of delight shook the forest, scaring away the returning crows. But for this head, the journey was just beginning. The body would remain rotting in the mud along with the legions, but Varus's head would go on a long journey, as a diplomatic package, as a terrible gift meant to unite all German tribes against Rome. When the screams died down and the last Roman stopped breathing, the forest changed. It ceased to be a battlefield. It turned into a temple, into a monstrous, grotesque cathedral under the open sky, where gods demanded payment for victory. If you dared to walk these paths a few days after the slaughter, you would see a scene that would make the blood run cold, even in the most hardened veterans. Here, in the shade of ancient oaks, the Germans celebrated their triumph. But this was not just the drunken revelry of victors dividing loot. It was a sacred act. For Arminius and his warriors, the destruction of the legions was a great sacrifice. Romans came with the sword and the law, and left as cattle slaughtered on the altar of old gods. Look at the trees. Look closely at the bark. Those are not growths or mushrooms. Those are skulls. Dozens, hundreds of skulls, nailed to trunks with long iron spikes. Empty sockets look at you with silent reproach. Bleaching bones against the background of dark moss. The Germans turned the forest into a gallery of death. It was a message, a warning to anyone who dared to set foot on this land with a weapon again. Here your power ends. Here, other forces rule. Archaeologists and historians, relying on the scant but terrible lines of Tacitus, tell us what happened in the sacred groves near the battlefield. Altars were built there, not of marble, as in Rome, but of turf and rough stones. And on these altars, the blood, not of bulls or sheep, was spilled. High-ranking centurions, military tribunes, those very first spears, the elite of the army, men whose discipline held the empire in a fist. They were not just killed in battle. Wounded and bound, They were dragged here to perform a ritual. We will not describe the details. Let your imagination complete this nightmare. Let's just say that the earth around these altars was soaked so deep that grass probably didn't grow there for many years. It was revenge not just against people, it was revenge against symbols. By destroying officers, the barbarians ritually killed the very idea of Roman domination, the very hierarchy on which the legion stood. And what happened to the eagles? 3 golden eagles, the sacred standards of the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions. For a Roman soldier, losing an eagle is a shame worse than death. A legion that has lost its eagle must be disbanded, and its name consigned to oblivion. In those days, the Germans captured all 3. Imagine this moment of triumph, a barbarian hand clutching the shaft that yesterday saluted Caesar. The golden bird, symbol of Jupiter, now decorated not with a laurel wreath, but with dried blood and mud. They were carried away into deep thickets, hidden in underground caches, given to chieftains as the highest sign of power. Rome would spend decades trying to return these pieces of gilded metal, because without them, the soul of the army remained in captivity. But the most terrible trophy was not the golden bird. Remember Varus's head? The one that was severed from the body on the 3rd day of the slaughter. Its story did not end in the mud of the Teutoburg Forest. It went on a long and gruesome journey. Arminius, that cynical strategist, knew what he was doing. He wrapped the head of his former friend in expensive cloth, put it in a chest, and sent it with messengers to the east. Where? To Maroboduus. Maroboduus was the king of the Marcomanni, the leader of a huge alliance of tribes in the territory of the modern Czech Republic. He had a powerful army and maintained neutrality. Arminius wanted to drag him into the war. The package with the Roman governor's head was a diplomatic ultimatum. It was an offer that, Arminius thought, was impossible to refuse. "Look," this dead head said, "Rome is not omnipotent. We broke their back. Join us, and we will burn the empire to the ground." Imagine Maroboduus's face when Arminius's envoys opened this chest before him. The smell of decay mixed with the smell of spices, and the familiar face of Publius Quintilius Varus, distorted by a grimace of death. Maroboduus was a barbarian, but he was a smart barbarian. He understood what Rome was. He understood that the destruction of 3 legions was not a victory. It was the beginning of the end. He knew that the empire would never forgive such humiliation. To accept this gift meant declaring war on the most powerful state on the planet. And Maroboduus got scared. Or, perhaps, showed political wisdom. He refused the alliance. He refused to join Arminius's uprising. Instead, he did something that surprised many. He ordered Varus's head to be sent further, to Rome. It was a gesture of incredible irony. A barbarian king returning a part of his favorite general to Emperor Augustus. "I have nothing to do with this," this gesture said. The unfortunate governor's head traveled thousands of kilometers, through mountains, through rivers, through borders, until, finally, it reached the Eternal City. Meanwhile, the Teutoburg Forest sank into silence. The bodies of 20,000 people remained lying where they fell. No one came to bury them. Wolves and crows finished what humans started. Rains washed away the flesh, exposing the bones. The wind covered them with leaves. Nature slowly but surely consumed the traces of the crime. Grass grew through ribs, roots entwined helmets. A huge cemetery without graves. A place that Germans would bypass out of superstitious fear, and Romans would see in nightmares. But while the forest digested its terrible meal, the news of the catastrophe flew to Italy. Rumors, one more terrible than the other, outstripped official messengers. Whispers crawled through taverns and markets, through military camps and senatorial villas. The legions have disappeared. Varus is dead. The Germans are coming. When, finally, the terrible truth reached the Palatine Hill and the ears of the emperor himself, the world Augustus had been building for decades shook. The most powerful man on earth, who considered himself almost a god, suddenly realized he was just an old man who failed to protect his children. And this blow was stronger than any dagger. While Varus's head, packaged as a sinister souvenir, traveled the roads of Europe, a golden age reigned in Rome. Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It seemed borders were unshakable, provinces submissive, and taxes flowed into the treasury in an endless river. Citizens strolled through the forum, discussed grain prices and bets on chariot races, confident that their sleep was guarded by the best legions in the universe. And suddenly, this crystal dome cracked. The news of the disaster in the Teutoburg Forest did not just come to Rome, it crashed down on it like a tsunami. At first, it was an incredulous whisper. It cannot be. 3 legions? Every single one? Then, the whisper turned into a scream. Officers arriving from the border with pale faces reported the unthinkable to the Senate. The army is gone. Germany is lost. The border on the Rhine is open, and between the wild hordes of barbarians and sunny Italy, not a single soldier stands anymore. Imagine the atmosphere in the Eternal City. This is not just mourning. This is panic, bordering on madness. In the collective memory of the Romans, old nightmares from a century ago instantly surfaced. The invasion of the Cimbri and Teutones, when hairy giants from the north almost wiped Rome off the face of the earth. Fear is the most powerful virus, and it infected everyone, from slave to emperor. But the most terrible blow struck the heart of the man who created this empire, Octavian Augustus. He is already 72 years old. He is an old man. He has lived a life full of intrigues, civil wars, and betrayals. He defeated all enemies. He turned Rome from brick to marble. He thought he had secured eternal peace for the state. And now, in the twilight of his days, his life's work is collapsing because of one presumptuous fool. The historian Suetonius left us a description that is chilling. The emperor, son of the divine Caesar, ruler of half the world, behaves like a madman. He rushes about the palace on the Palatine Hill. He cannot sleep. In fits of despair, he bangs his head against the doorframe. Do you hear that dull thud? It is the thud of powerlessness. The most powerful man on the planet screams into the void the same phrase over and over, which will become the epitaph of his reign. Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions. Think about these words. It is not an order. It is a plea. It is the cry of the soul of a man who is used to his will being a law of nature, but suddenly faced something that does not obey decrees. Death. Augustus realizes the legions will not return. 20,000 young, strong men, the flower of the nation, are rotting in a swamp. And he, the emperor, is to blame. He appointed Varus. He believed that peace had arrived. Augustus declares mourning. But this is not just a formality. He does not cut his hair or beard for months. For a Roman of that time, this is a sign of the deepest grief and humiliation. The emperor walks around overgrown, gloomy, like a ghost. He cancels holidays. He bans games. the whole city plunges into depression. But behind the grief lies cold, sticky fear. Rome expects an invasion. Martial law is declared in the city. For the first time in many years, armed patrols appear on the streets of Rome. Bonfires burn at night. People look fearfully to the north, expecting to see the smoke of fires on the horizon. The authorities announce a forced draft, but no one wants to join the army. No one wants to go to Germany, to this green hell from which no one returns. Romans, these celebrated warriors, hide. The rich buy their way out. The poor flee to the villages. And then Augustus shows his old, cruel face. He orders the execution of every fifth draft dodger. The property of cowards is confiscated. People are stripped of citizenship. The empire is in hysterics. It is ready to kill its own citizens just to scrape together some kind of army to plug the gap on the Rhine.
The Germans are already at the Alps!
Panickers scream in the markets. Every rumor is blown up to the scale of a catastrophe. It seems to the Romans that Arminius is a new Hannibal who is about to knock on the gates of the city. But Arminius did not come. This was the main mistake of the Roman strategists. They judged the Germans by themselves. If a Roman general destroyed an enemy army, he would immediately march on the enemy capital. But the Germans are tribes. For them, the victory in the Teutoburg Forest was the end, not the beginning. They seized the loot, they took revenge, they defended their freedom, and went home to celebrate. They had neither the logistics nor the desire to march on Italy. Arminius tried to rally them, tried to explain that the beast needed to be finished off, but they only half listened. The warriors wanted to drink Roman wine from captured goblets, not march another 1,000 kilometers. While the barbarians feasted, Rome began to recover. Fear was replaced by cold determination. The empire is a mechanism that knows how to repair itself. They send Tiberius to the Rhine, Augustus's stepson, the future emperor, a gloomy, unsociable man, but a brilliant commander. He is not Varus. He does not trust smiles. He does not believe in diplomacy. He believes only in the manual and discipline. Tiberius arrives at the border and sees chaos. Demoralized remnants of garrisons ready to run at the sight of any bush. Tiberius tightens the screws. Cruelly, mercilessly. He forbids officers luxury. He sleeps on the ground with the soldiers. He personally inspects posts. Any breach of discipline is punishable by death. He restores the army's combat capability not with carrots, but with an iron whip. He crosses the Rhine, but he does not go deep into the forest. He sticks to the bank. He does not engage in large battles. His task is to show the Germans, we are still here. We haven't left. You defeated Varus, but you didn't defeat Rome. It is a show of force, psychological warfare. Tiberius burns a couple of villages, takes a couple of hostages, and returns. This is enough to stop the panic. The border is stabilized. There will be no invasion. Rome exhaled. But the trauma remained. The shock of the year 9 forever changed the psychology of Rome. Augustus, dying 5 years later, would leave advice to his successors in his will. Do not expand the boundaries of the empire. Keep within the limits set by nature. The Teutoburg Forest taught the Romans that their power had a limit. However, in the shadows, behind the back of the cautious Tiberius, a new generation is already growing up. A generation that does not remember the horror of defeat, but burns with a thirst for revenge. Young wolves for whom honor is more important than safety. And the brightest, most dangerous of them is Germanicus. He looks to the east, across the river, and sees not a threat, but unfinished business. Rome licked its wounds. Rome buried, albeit in absentia, its dead. Now Rome wants blood. And it will get it. Lots of blood. The era of retribution begins. 6 years passed, 6 long years during which the Rhine was not just a river, but a scar on the body of Europe. Romans looked at the dark forests of the eastern bank with the same mixture of fear and hatred with which a child looks at a closet where a monster lives. The empire licked its wounds. It learned to live with the thought that somewhere out there, in the fog, lay the unburied bones of its sons. Tiberius, that pragmatic and cold emperor, was ready to accept it. He counted the losses. The war in Germany cost too much and brought only death. From an accounting point of view, Germany should have been left alone. But history has its own accounts, and they are not always paid in gold. Sometimes the currency becomes only blood. A new player enters the stage. Forget about old, cautious Tiberius. Look at the man the crowd idolizes. His name is Germanicus Julius Caesar. He is 29 years old. He is young, he is handsome as Apollo, and the blood of Rome's most famous families flows in his veins. He is the emperor's nephew, but in spirit, he is the reincarnation of Alexander the Great. Soldiers are ready to die for a single glance from him. If Varus was a bureaucrat and Tiberius a mathematician of war, then Germanicus is a rock star. And he wants glory. But not the glory won by building aqueducts. He needs ultio, revenge. Total, absolute, Old Testament revenge. 14 AD. Augustus is dead. Legions on the Rhine are mutinying, demanding money and discharge. The situation is critical. And what does Germanicus do? He doesn't just calm the mutiny, he redirects the soldiers' rage. He steps out in front of the formation, in front of thousands of angry, tired men, and points his hand to the east. "You want gold," he shouts. "You want justice. There, across the river, live those who killed your brothers. Take everything from them. Their lives are your pay." It is a brilliant and monstrous move. He turns a civil war into a punitive expedition. The Roman machine crosses the Rhine again, but this time the goal has changed. Watch his hands closely. This is no longer a conquest. This is not an attempt to expand borders or collect taxes. Germanicus does not take census takers and judges with him. He takes torches. This is genocide as state policy. For the first time in a long while, Rome casts off the mask of the civilizer and shows its true face. The face of a ruthless predator that has been wounded and will now tear everything living apart until it is satiated. The scorched-earth tactic. You know this term from 20th century history, but the Romans invented it. Germanicus's army moves through the lands of the Marsi tribe on a broad front of 50 miles. They burn everything. Every village, every farm, every shrine. They destroy crops to doom the survivors to starvation in winter. Imagine this night. The Marsi tribe is celebrating the festival of the goddess Tanfana. They are drunk. They are asleep. They have not posted sentries. They think the war is far away. The Romans come in the darkness. Tacitus, the Roman historian, describes this with frightening calm. Neither sex nor age moved compassion. That is a euphemism. Let's translate this into the language of reality. Legionaries break into huts. They kill old men in their beds. They tear babies from mothers' arms. This is not a battle. This is a slaughter. Soldiers who lived in fear of scary Germans for 6 years now take out their terror on the defenseless. They hack, stab, and burn with the ecstasy of maniacs. By morning, the Marsi tribe no longer exists. It is wiped off the ethnic map of Europe in one night. Germanicus writes reports to Rome.
There's not a word in them about glorious battles with an equal opponent. There are only dry figures of destroyed villages and killed barbarians. He knows what he is doing. He wants to provoke Arminius. He wants to lure him out. "Look," he says with every burned house, "I am killing your people, and you can do nothing. Where is your cunning? Where are your gods?" Arminius sees the smoke of fires. He realizes that the rules of the game have changed. Varus was a fool who could be tricked. Germanicus is a butcher who can only be killed. The tribal alliance begins to crack at the seams. Chieftains look at Arminius with a question in their eyes. "You promised us freedom, but brought death. The Romans have returned, and they have become worse than demons." The Germans try to resist. They set ambushes, they attack foragers. But Germanicus's legions are not Varus's stretched-out column. They are a clenched fist. They march in battle formation, ready to attack at any second. When the Germans attack from the forest, they meet a wall of shields and a hail of pila. The Romans have learned to fight in the forest. They no longer panic. They methodically grind down the attackers and move on. Fear changes poles. Now it is not the Romans who fear the forest, but the forest that fears the Romans. Germanicus goes deeper and deeper into enemy territory. His ambitions know no bounds, but there is one place that pulls him like a magnet. A place marked on all maps with a black spot. A place soldiers speak of in whispers by the campfires. Teutoburg Forest. It is somewhere nearby, just a few marches away, where time stopped 6 years ago. Scouts report, "We found the path. We found the place." Germanicus makes a decision. He announces to the army that they are going there, not to fight, but to perform an act of supreme piety and supreme psychological therapy. They are going to bury the dead. Imagine what the soldiers feel. Many of them lost brothers, fathers, friends there. They are not just going to a cemetery. They are going to a haunted house. The air becomes heavy. The forest around closes in again, reminding them of the past. But now they are led not by blind Varus, but by a young wolf thirsty for blood. They approach the border of the cursed zone. The smell of burning from torched villages is replaced by another smell, the smell of old decay and dampness. Birds still do not sing here. Silence presses on the ears. Germanicus rides in front. He wants his soldiers to see this. He wants them to see what the barbarians did to the pride of Rome. He knows. What they find there will forever burn pity out of their souls. After this march, no legionary's hand will tremble when he plunges a sword into a German's belly. The gates to hell are open. The Roman army enters the Teutoburg Forest for the second time. And what appears before their eyes will be more terrible than any stories. You enter the forest, and it seems the same as any other. Trees, bushes, grass. But then you notice details that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The ground here is uneven. Bumps, mounds, strange hillocks, and silence. Absolute vacuum silence, broken not even by the creaking armor of thousands of soldiers walking behind your back. The Roman army enters the heart of darkness. 6 long years later, they returned to the scene of the crime. Germanicus leads his legions not to battle, but on a pilgrimage to hell. The first thing that catches the eye when the vanguard comes out onto a wide clearing is the whiteness. Amidst the lush, moist greenery of moss and ferns, white spots are scattered everywhere. These are not stones.
These are bones. Thousands and thousands of bones, bleached by time, rain, and sun. They lie everywhere, as if some mad sower scattered seeds of death here, but they never sprouted. Tacitus left us a description of this scene that reads like a horror movie script. In the middle of the field, bones were whitening, either scattered or piled in heaps. This is a silent map of the battle. Where bones lie singly, soldiers ran, trying to escape, and were overtaken from behind. Where they lie in mountains, the last cohorts stood to the death, back to back, until they were buried under bodies. You walk across this field, and every step is a crunch. Ribs of their predecessors break under the legionaries' feet. Rusty iron sticks out of the ground like poisonous mushrooms. Fragments of spears, bent helmets with empty eye sockets, remains of chariots. All this has grown into the earth, intertwined with roots. Nature began to absorb the war, but could not digest it completely. But the most terrible thing is not the chaos of battle. The most terrible thing is the traces of order. Soldiers approach trees and stop in stupor. On the trunks of ancient oaks, at the height of a human, skulls are nailed. They look at the arrivals with empty, black holes. This is not an accident. This is design. The Germans decorated their forest with these trophies, creating a gruesome avenue of triumph. And a little further, in shady groves, stand altars, the very ones the survivors whispered about. Rough stone tables on which dried blood turned into black stone. Tribunes were slaughtered here. Centurions of the first rank were sacrificed here. Imagine what a Roman soldier standing before this altar feels. Perhaps he knew the man who was killed here. Perhaps they drank wine in the same tavern. Now he looks at the place of his martyrdom and realizes, this could have been me. Germanicus dismounts. He is pale but calm. He knows that tens of thousands of eyes are watching him now. This is the moment of truth for the army's morale. If they get scared, the war is lost. If they get angry, the Germans are finished. Germanicus approaches a pile of bones. No one knows whose they are. Maybe they are the bones of a legate, or maybe a simple mule driver. Death equalized everyone. There are no ranks here. There are only Romans. The imperial nephew takes a handful of earth. He is the first to throw it on the bones, symbolically opening the funeral. Work begins that chills the soul. Soldiers, putting aside swords, take shovels. They collect the remains of their comrades. They do not try to separate one from another. It is impossible. They dig a huge mass grave. One giant mound for the entire lost army. At this moment, a strange transformation occurs. Usually, a funeral is grief, tears, crying, quiet prayers. But here, in the Teutoburg Forest, the air begins to vibrate with a different emotion. Soldiers hold punctured skulls in their hands. They see traces of torture on the bones, and grief burns out. In its place comes cold, black rage. Tacitus writes, "Grief and anger possessed them." This is no longer an army mourning losses. This is a pack of wolves that saw torn puppies. Every clod of earth thrown is an oath. Every bone found is fuel for hatred. They no longer fear the forest. They hate it. They want to burn it to the ground, uproot every tree that was a witness to Varus's shame. The psychological barrier is broken. Until this moment, the legionaries fought an abstract enemy. Now the enemy has a face. The face of a sadist who not only killed, but humiliated. Germanicus achieved his goal. He brought frightened people here and leads fanatics away. When the last skull disappears underground and a huge mound grows over the forest, Germanicus delivers a speech. We do not know the exact words, but their meaning is clear. Look at this. Remember this. And the next time your hand trembles before a strike, remember this day. They leave the forest without looking back. They leave the dead in peace, but take their shadows with them. Now in every battle, the ghost of a killed comrade demanding blood will stand behind the legionaries' back. Ahead of them awaits Idistaviso, Valley of the Virgin, the place where Arminius decides to finally give open battle, confident in his invincibility. He thinks he broke the spirit of the Romans with this terrible sight. He thinks the sight of bones will make them tremble. How wrong he is. The Roman army emerges from the forest like a red-hot blade from a forge. They are no longer people following an order. They are instruments of retribution. And when the two armies meet face to face, the Germans will see in the Romans' eyes not fear, but the reflection of their own end. The pendulum of history has swung back. The executioner is about to become the victim. 16th year AD. The plain of Idistaviso. In the language of local tribes, this means Valley of the Virgin. Here, on the banks of the Weser River, history finally set the pieces for the final game. Forget the cramped, stifling nightmare of the Teutoburg Forest. Here, there is space. Here, there is air. And here, the Roman military machine can finally do what it was created for: deploy into battle formation and crush the enemy. Germanicus leads his legions onto the field. He is calm. He learned Varus's lessons. No more wagons with furniture, no civilians, no friendly walks. His flanks are covered by cavalry. His archers keep distance. His soldiers are no longer those frightened recruits who trembled at every rustle. They are veterans, whose hearts are hardened by hatred and the thirst for ultio, sacred revenge. They saw the bones of their brothers in the forest. Now they want to add fresh enemy bones to them. On the hills opposite stands Arminius. He gathered everyone he could. Bructeri, Cherusci, Marsi, a huge, motley, screaming horde. Arminius realizes that his main trump card, surprise, was played long ago. Now he faces a fair fight. Wall against wall, what he always avoided. But there is nowhere to retreat. Behind him is free Germany. Before him is an enraged Roman eagle, ready to peck. The battle begins not with chaos, but with the disciplined silence of the Romans. When the Germans rush into the attack with a wild howl, hoping to crush the formation with their furious pressure, they crash not into a frightened crowd, but into an iron breakwater. It was a beating. The technological and tactical superiority of Rome manifested in all its glory. Legionaries worked their swords like butchers on a conveyor belt. Shield bash, thrust, step forward. Bash, thrust, step forward. The mechanical rhythm of death. Germans, accustomed to individual duels, were simply ground up. Arminius himself participated in the battle. He saw his army melting away. Roman historians claim he was wounded and, to avoid being recognized by Roman archers, smeared his face with the blood of a killed comrade. The hero liberator fled. By evening, the battlefield at Idistaviso was strewn with German corpses. Roman soldiers, intoxicated by triumph, pursued the fleeing until nightfall. The Weser River, according to chroniclers, turned red with blood and clogged with bodies. This was a complete, unconditional victory. The one Augustus dreamed of, the one Germanicus promised. And here it is, the main moment of redemption. During this campaign, the Romans managed to perform a miracle. They find and recapture 2 of the 3 lost eagles of Varus's legions. Imagine this scene. Soldiers carry the golden birds back to camp. They are crying. They kiss the metal. It is not just a piece of gold. It is returned honor. The stain of shame is washed away. Now one can look into the eyes of the gods and ancestors. Varus is avenged.
Germanicus orders a huge trophy to be built on the battlefield, a mountain of captured weapons. On it is the inscription, "The army of Tiberius Caesar, having conquered the nations between the Rhine and the Elbe, dedicated this monument to Mars, Jupiter, and Augustus." Note the wording, having conquered the nations. Germanicus believes the deed is done. He is sure that Germany is now a Roman province. He needs just one more year, one summer to finish off the last pockets of resistance, build roads and forts, and the border of the empire will move from the Rhine to the Elbe. Europe will become united. History will go down a different path. But here a man enters the game who sits in Rome and reads financial reports. Emperor Tiberius. While Germanicus revels in the glory of a new Alexander, Tiberius looks at the numbers, and he doesn't like the numbers. War costs colossal money. Losses, despite victories, are huge. Storms in the North Sea destroyed part of the fleet. Horses are dying. Gear is rotting. And what in return? What does Germany offer? Endless forests? Swamps? Savages who don't want to pay taxes but only want to rebel? Tiberius is a pragmatist to the bone. He understands what the romantic Germanicus does not. Winning a battle does not mean winning a war. You can kill 10,000 Germans, but 20,000 more will take their place. Holding this territory means dooming Rome to an eternal guerrilla war that will suck all the juices out of the treasury. And Tiberius makes a move that many considered betrayal, but which was actually an act of supreme state wisdom. He sends Germanicus a letter. Return. This is an order, tough and non-negotiable. Tiberius writes, paraphrasing the essence, "You have done enough. You avenged Varus. You returned the eagles. Rome's honor is restored. But enough risking the army for swamps. Leave the Germans to their own discords." Germanicus is furious. He begs. He writes that victory is already in hand, that one cannot stop halfway. But the emperor is adamant. He recalls his too popular and too ambitious nephew to Rome to give him a triumph and send him far away, to the east, where he soon dies mysteriously. But that is a completely different detective story. Legions leave. They strike the camps. They burn bridges behind them. They go across the Rhine, and this time, forever. This moment, Germanicus's departure, is more important than the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest itself. It was at this moment that an invisible but eternal line was drawn on the map of Europe. The border, the limes. On one side of the Rhine remained Rome. Stone roads, vineyards, Latin, law, cities, Christianity in the future. On the other side remained Germany. Forests, tribal alliances, runes, beer, paganism. Rome gave up on Germany. It built a wall and said, "Beyond is darkness. We don't need to go there." So who actually won this bloody drama? If you look at tactics, Rome won. It defeated the enemy at Idistaviso, returned its symbols and showed strength. But if you look at strategy, at the long distance of history, Arminius won. Yes, Arminius ended badly. Like many revolutionaries, he became a victim of his victory. After the Romans left, he tried to become king over all Germans. But his people did not need a king. They needed freedom, both from Rome and from their own tyrants. Arminius was killed by his own relatives. Tacitus writes,
He was undoubtedly the liberator of Germany. His victory in the Teutoburg Forest did the main thing. It proved that Rome could be stopped. It kept the German world independent. Language, culture, genes, all survived because 3 legions lay down in the mud in the year 9 AD. If not for Arminius, today Germany might speak a Romance language, like France or Spain. There would be no English language, which is also from the Germanic group.
The entire history of Western civilization would be different. But the price? What was the price? Rome lost legions, but preserved the empire for another 400 years. Germany preserved freedom, but lost the chance to become part of a developed civilization. It remained in the darkness of barbarism for another half-millennium, while the rest of Europe built cities and wrote books. The Teutoburg Forest today is a quiet place. Archaeologists still find coins, sandal nails, and masks there. Tourists walk along paths where Augustus's best soldiers once died. Trees have grown and fallen hundreds of times. But if you find yourself there, stop for a minute. Listen. The wind in the treetops rustles just as it did 2,000 years ago. And in this noise, you can hear the echo of a question that history asks each of us. Which is more important? Security in a golden cage of an empire, or dangerous, dirty, cold, but freedom? Varus chose comfort and was mistaken. Arminius chose freedom and betrayed a friend. And Rome simply drew a line on the map and decided to forget this terrible dream. But the scar remained. And we, living in a Europe divided into Romance and Germanic worlds, still live inside this scar. This was the Teutoburg Forest. The day Rome broke. The day Europe was born. The end.